Hello and welcome to Ways to Change the World. I'm Krishnan guru-murthy, and this is the podcast in which we talk to extraordinary people about the big ideas in their lives and the events that have helped shape them. We're on location this week at a rehearsal studio just outside Brighton because my guest this week is Gary Numan. Now, Gary, of course, is one of the pioneers of electronic music, and he's had all sorts of parallel existences. For a long time, he was a stunt pilot and spent a lot of time in aircraft. But throughout this period, he's continued to innovate, to make music, to release albums, and his latest is out this week. So thank you very much indeed for joining us. It's really nice to see you.
Our pleasure, thank you.
I mean, this album has a theme through it, which is very much about climate change, but you're not a sort of a fashionable arrival at this theme, because your last album was also about climate change as well. So, I mean, so why have you chosen this as something to write about over such a long time?
Well, the last one was accidental, really. I wasn't sure what to do. The one before that had got into the chart again, number 20, which is the first time I've been in the chart for about 35 years. And I suddenly felt the pressure of interest. You know, people were now looking at what I was doing. I was so not used to that because it's been such a long time. I was trying to write a book called Ruin about this future world post-climate apocalypse. And so I just started to borrow ideas from that just to get me going, you know, just to get something underway. And pretty much, I think the same weekend that I started doing that, so Trump announced that he was going to be running for president. I started to talk about, you know, climate change being a hoax and you know, pulling the US out of the Paris Accord and so on, which I thought was horrifying, you know, ignorant and stupid.
And I should have said you live in California now.
I live in California, yeah, so it was particularly relevant. And the more he spoke about it, the more I felt I should keep writing more about it. It wasn't really a commentary on him or what was going on, because it really was a science fiction-y kind of thing. You know, I was looking at what human beings would become in 100 years or so post-climate apocalypse, and how brutal we would become, how horrendous it would be, you know, with those that were left. Anyway, so that was that. So that sort of brought me into the whole climate change thing.
Well, you've always been famous for looking at the bright side of life.
Yeah, that's true.
Do you feel that that's where we're heading, you know, when you talk about climate apocalypse?
No, there's no optimism on it whatsoever. There's no sort of dangly thread at the end that gives you a spark of hope. I don't feel a great deal of hope, to be honest. You know, there's always that part of you that thinks it'll work out, but not much anymore, and it gets smaller all the time. And I'm not sure that we deserve to win. From a selfish point of view, I don't want to die, I don't want my kids to die, I don't want anyone to die, really. But from the planet's point of view, you know, the best thing that could possibly happen is that we vanish. I wonder, you know, whether with us, nature made a rare mistake. It just reached a little bit too far. You gave us one level of curiosity too many, one sort of level of ingenuity too many, too intelligent. Gave us opposable thumbs, which gives you tools, which gives you machinery.
And how about your own life? I mean, you know, how big a hypocrite are you? I mean, we're all hypocrites on this. I mean, but obviously you spent a lot of time in aviation, which is terrible for the environment, at least. Yeah. So, I mean, how consistent are you? My eco-credentials are shockingly bad. I've got an electric car, but I've got 3 others that aren't. You know, I flew here in an aeroplane, I'll fly home on one. But that doesn't mean what I'm saying is wrong. You know, I'm a terrible, terrible messenger, but with a very, very good message. I mean, you became a musician because, I mean, at least partly because your parents believed in you.
Oh, well, they enabled me, yeah, for sure. When I first got interested in music when I was very, very little, I say 4, but you know, around 4, 5, 6 at a young age, and I saw Hank Marvin on the television playing an electric guitar, and I'd never been aware of an electric guitar before, and it was that fascinated me. It was the fact that you could plug it in, it was electric, and it had dials and switches, and it just looked amazing. So it was the technology, actually, that got me interested in it, not really the music itself. And as time went by, and I got my own electric guitar, much, much later, it was still the noises that it made that I was fascinated by, not technique. I'm a rubbish player.
Did you ever learn properly to play?
No. I'm still a terrible because I can play it, but you know, I'd never get a job in somebody else's band. That's why I had to start my own. Keyboards are the same. You know, if you ask me to play a G sharp chord, not a clue. Absolutely not a clue.
So you don't know music theory?
No, can't write it. You know, no idea at all.
So what do? Do you just pick out tunes?
I hear it. I know what that's the note I'm going to start with. I never do chords, just notes, and then I just work it out. And it sounds right when it sounds right. So I stumble along, and it works for me. And the reason I've never put the time in to learn how to do it properly or to be a better player is because I don't know what this is. And I'm terrified of losing it. If you learn how to do it properly and you know what works with that, well then you go straight to that every time. So it makes you predictable, arguably. Half Inch Electric is a classic example of playing notes you shouldn't play and getting #1 with it. So it works for me.
But Our Friends Electric is, I think, an amazing example because it is, as you say, the components to Our Friends Electric are simple. And it's easy to play. But the way you've arranged it and the way you've done it and the way the noise comes in at different junctures is surprising and brilliant. And the brilliance of that song is, you know, is not in the technical genius of it. It's somehow how it all comes together.
Yeah, that's pretty much true of everything I've ever done, really. Everything that I've ever written will be easy to play because I played it. Everything. You know, there's not a song that I've ever written that any average keyboard player or guitar player couldn't play easily. It's the layers. It's what comes next, and it's what you add to it, and how you have multiple melodies all interacting together.
So how were you doing that in the 70s? Because today you can do it easily on a computer and it will keep playing what you've written and you can just keep adding the layers and say, that sounds good and that sounds good and let's try that.
Yeah.
But you didn't have any of that back then.
Well, we had limited multi-tracking, so you had the ability to do a certain amount of layer in. But if you listen to the stuff back then, it was a lot simpler than it is now. You know, the amount of textures on the records now, they're a world away from what I was doing back then because the technology allows you to do that. I didn't have a synthesizer actually. I think I'd made 3 albums before I could afford a synthesizer. So we would rent them in for a few hours. I'd hurriedly try to work out some sounds. I didn't know how they worked. Just fiddling around, make it make a noise you liked, record that as quickly as possible, find out what, you know, oh, that would be good in those 3 songs, do it really quickly. If you listen to those early albums, there's mistakes all over them. You know, bad playing, just didn't have time to do it again. They come into Galactic, no, we've got to do it quickly.
So how did you, well, take Our Friends Electric, just because we're talking about it. How did that build? You know, did you start with the bass line, which is very iconic, or the melody, or what?
I wrote it on the piano, so the do-do-do-do-do-do, that was all done on the piano. Get to the studio, record that, and then quickly put the synths on top of it. There's guitar all over it, there's guitar in it as well. Get that down, get the drums down, and then listen, what does it need? What's missing? You know, and then just start to build it up that way. Much the same as you do it now.
And you still do it now that way, that's what I was going to say.
It all starts at the piano. I sit down at the piano, go to the studio in the morning, walk through the door with not an idea in my head, usually. Generally, I don't have lots of ideas in my head floating around. Just sit down and then just start. And something always happens, always, every time.
I've heard you a few times talk about your lack of confidence, which is odd for a rock star and a pilot. So just explain this. How did a lacking in confidence teenager say, I want to front a band?
Well, first of all, I never lacked confidence in aeroplanes. I was supremely confident in aeroplanes. You wouldn't do all that low-level stuff if you wasn't arrogantly sure that you were doing it correctly and you'd survive. I think the difference with music is I have people that I admire and I'm not as good as them. I don't feel in their league. And so your confidence, I think, is a reflection of that. I'm never as good as the people I look up to. And I feel that. I've always felt that. I feel it now, I feel it the day I started. I think it's a good thing. I don't think it's a bad thing. I think if you think you're sort of, you know, God's gift to music, you're going to walk into a studio, you're going to love the first thing you do because it's great because you did it. That's the last thing I think. I don't think what I do is special. I don't think I'm particularly talented. I think I've been really lucky and I've got a good ear for a tune. You know, that's it. I can churn out melodies all day long, which, you know, thank God for that.
That's quite special.
I don't think so. I really don't. I'm not trying to be humble. I'm not trying to be falsely humble. I honestly believe that being able to write songs is one of the most abundant talents in the world. You know, almost everyone can do it. Most people choose not to, but, you know, most people can turn out a tune. You put them down at a piano. A really, really good singer, that's not so good. Which I'm not. You know, great players, they're a bit harder to find. I'm not. You know, I can do tunes.
But you were in an area that wasn't common. You know, electronic music was not where it was at generally in the 70s.
No.
You know, why weren't you in a punk band thrashing around on guitars? Or is that what you had intended to be originally?
No, I didn't want to be that.
You know, you went to something that was very different, specialised. Did you have any people you were looking up to at that stage who would say, because no one was doing it?
No, I didn't. But that was lucky, you see. I was in a punk band. I joined a punk band. I did change it during the first rehearsal into something else, but nonetheless, it was still a punk band. And we got signed as a punk band. The good thing about punk, which I wasn't really a big fan of musically, but the good thing was it created a huge amount of new opportunities for people. Small ones, but they were there. Lots of the major record companies were signing token punk bands, so they had one on their roster or two. There were lots of new labels starting up that you could get onto more easily. So all of a sudden, you know, these very sort of small doors that were very hard to get through were now a little bit bigger, and there's more of them. We've gone to the studio to make the first punk album, which is my commitment, and it was there that I found the synthesizer. I went in to say hello to the man that ran the studio and introduce ourselves while the other two were unloading the car, and there's this mini Moog in the corner. You know, and my fascination with technology was right there again. You know, wow, look at that. It was so powerful. I mean, one finger, press one finger, and the whole room shook. You didn't just hear it, you felt it.
And you integrated it straight away, did you?
Immediately, yeah. I didn't go back out. I left the other two to carry on unloading the car, and they got really grumpy. They come in there to go at me. You know, you're meant to be helping. I said, well, it doesn't matter. Everything's changed.
Listen to this.
This is the thing, you know. So we spent the next 3 days grafting that onto our punk songs and pulling the guitars out to a degree. I took that album back to the record company and they were really not happy at all. But I was convinced. I thought that this new instrument, for me, was going to change everything. I thought I was the first one to find it. It's really stupid. I didn't know that Human League were in Sheffield. I didn't know that IMD were in Liverpool. I didn't know that all these other bands were out there already doing it. Ultravox on their third album, when I made my first, and I didn't even know about them, you know, and they were amazing, so much better than I was. But I didn't know that. I thought I'd discovered it. And so I go to the record company and they say, you know, this is going to revolutionise everything. I said, and we have a chance to be right at the front end. I was like, right at the beginning, we can be a part of it. I said, punk's dying. He said, look, it's dying on its feet. I don't want to be a part of that. This is what's coming. They weren't having it to start with, and it got really childish. And at one point, the other director stepped in and just said, well, let's go with it and see. So they put it out, that first album, that was called True by Army, and that, you know, it didn't do anything special, but it wasn't slaughtered in the press. It was all right, you know, so it did as good as I'd thought the punk album would do. So they let me do another one, and within a few months I had the next one out. That was called Replicas, and that had Our Friends Electric on it, and that went to #1. And so, you know, within a few months of discovering the synthesizer, I was #1.
How did you get that #1? Because you weren't being played. I remember the week that song hit #1 and watching Top of the Pops and going, well, wow, what is this? So how did that go to #1 so quickly?
The reason it got to where it got is because the record company released 20,000 copies of it on a picture disc, which was a very new sort of marketing format at the time. Now that was an amazing thing when you consider that I'd only sold about 3,000 or 4,000 singles before. Whoever that man was, a person was that decided that, changed my life. And I don't know who it was. I never did find out who it was. But that went out. That got it to number 71, I think, or maybe one further down. At that time, Top of the Pops had a thing that I think it was called Bubbling Under, something like that. And they would play a record that wasn't in the chart. They would normally play only chart stuff. Then he started this Bubbling Under thing for a short period of time. And that week, it was either me, or Guru-murthy, or Simple Minds. And I'm told, and I don't know if this is true or not, but I'm told that the person at Top of the Pops that decided thought Guru-murthy was more interesting name than Simple Minds. And so that's how we got it. I mean, how lucky is that, you know? That got us on Top of the Pops, and then, you know, I had something to do with it from then on. When we got on Top of the Pops, having watched it all my life, I'd noticed that they always had loads of colours. Everyone's flashing colours all the time, so everyone looked the same, and people would always sort of be looking at the camera with a slight smile on their face, and I was really happy. And I just thought it looked naff, you know. So when I got there, I said to the BBC crew, I said, would you mind if you didn't have any colours, if we just have white light? And can we have it coming up from the floor, some of it, so it makes shadows and things? We was all going to be dressed in black with the white faces and that. I thought that would look cool. And I said, I'm not going to look at the camera much. I don't want to do that. I'm going to look at the people here, and I look at the camera when it matters, certain lines when it matters. I thought it would just deliver it into the people at home just a bit more by selecting when you did it. So I did that. And they were great. I thought they'd be really awkward, you know. I'd heard all sorts of rumours.
Yeah.
But they were great. They were lovely. It's like they seemed happy that someone was interested in the way it looked, you know. It sort of became a thing, you know, this thing about not smiling, and, you know, so part of it was deliberate, and part of it I just recognised what worked and what didn't, and then sort of just fine-tuned it a little bit for subsequent performances, and just went on from there, really. But up until that point, I don't think I'd had that much to do with it. You know, it was just luck.
You're one of the first people to have talked about mental health, although we didn't used to talk about it as mental health in those days, whether it was your shyness or Aspergers.
Yeah.
Can you talk me through how that's affected all these early years and you becoming a pop star, a rock star?
Well, I've always seen it as a huge advantage, particularly for this sort of career, I think. A lot of the things that people talk about with Aspergers as being problems, I don't see as problems at all. I see them as advantages. Obsession, for example. You know, they say, oh, you have obsessive tendencies, like it's a bad thing. It's not a bad thing. If you're flying along in an airliner, you hope that your pilot's obsessed about flying aeroplanes. You know, so in certain situations, it's a really good thing to be obsessed. And I think in this business, in music business, to be driven, to be obsessed about where you want to go, so that's all you think about, is a really good thing.
So how does Asperger's affect you?
Well, the price you pay for the things that it gives you are social interaction is difficult. Eye contact, you know, I struggle with eye contact. No emotion. The downside of that is we had a cat just die recently, and my wife's all in pieces about that. She feels that really, really badly. And I feel it, but I don't feel it the way she feels it. And so I'm not as comforting always as I need to be. And I know that, and I can see that I'm failing, and I don't quite know what to do about that. It's one of the few things I struggle to explain well to do with Asperger's. I genuinely believe that I feel some things more than other people, but not all. And the way I deal with those emotions and the way I handle them is definitely different.
I mean, because you seem very different to the Gary Numan I remember watching 30 years ago. Yeah. You know, you're very chatty, conversational. You weren't like that in interviews back then. So have you changed, or have you just learnt to handle things differently?
I think it's a bit of both. I think as I've got older, being able to recognise Asperger's things is a very, very useful thing, you know, because now I can mechanically sort of step around them a little bit. But I do think getting older helps. You know, I mean, I've done this sort of thing, for example, my whole life now. I've got something to talk about. I've got a life to talk about. I didn't have that when I started doing it. You know, I made an album. You know, I haven't done anything. I still lived at home with my mum and dad. You know, what are you going to talk about? I think it's just a general sort of living life and just calming down a little bit. Really.
Does that make you more comfortable with getting older?
No. No, not at all. Oh God, I hate it. hate it. I've got a real problem with it. My midlife crisis hit me just after 50. And it wasn't young girls and sports cars and none of that. I was terrified of getting old. I couldn't, it actually became a problem. I had to have treatment for it. I couldn't look at old people. I couldn't look at them. I'd start crying. Couldn't look at old people. This lovely old couple walked past, like in their 80s or something. And I used to get really upset.
Why? Because you were seeing yourself? Or?
Yeah. Yeah, a lot of that, but not only that. I felt sad for them as well. But yeah, a lot of it was me. Horribly self-centered.
What is it you don't like about age? Is it the proximity to death? Or is it how you look, or what you can do, or all of the above?
It's proximity to death. It's the increasing chances of horrible illnesses. You know, the way you die becomes relevant. Losing people you love. I'm terrified. Every headache is a brain tumour. Every stomach ache is stomach cancer. You know, I'm horribly weak. My mum was amazing. My mum spent years with all sorts of different cancers, and you never would know it from talking to her. She's amazing. I'm the opposite of that. I'm a frightened little rabbit.
And you're in the worst possible industry for someone who doesn't like age, I suppose.
yeah. Oh, I'm kicking and screaming. I'm not growing old gracefully. I've got surgery and hair transplants and a diet. Oh no, there's no grace in me whatsoever.
And so the surgery is just about looking young, is it?
Yeah.
Or what have you done?
Oh, facelift. I've had 4 hair transplants. Not for a long time now. I think I'm done with that. I've had 2 facelifts now, actually. Yeah. And quite recently.
Yeah.
What else? Oh no, that's it. Actually, I don't think I've got anything else done. My wife's done about 50 different operations. She's like regular.
Because your wife's the thing is you raised her. I mean, your wife was one of your biggest fans, and that's partly how you met her. Yeah. Well, she was a fan. Yeah. I'm my biggest. She was a fan. Well, presumably not anymore, but.
No. Tells you what song she doesn't like now. She's been amazing for me. My sort of renaissance of my career, so to speak, from '94 onwards, is entirely down to her.
But the story of how you met is also very unusual, and it says something different about you, I think, which is that, as I read it, correct me if I'm wrong, I mean, you reached out to her because she was a regular fan you'd got to know.
Yes.
And you discovered that she'd been bereaved, her mother had died. And so you contacted her. That seems a very unusual thing for a rock star to do to a fan.
What had happened was, I mean, she used to come to all the shows. She was always there, always down the front, everywhere. Really pretty, you know, used to stand out. But she never did the whole groupie thing. She'd never come back afterwards and go back to the hotel. Didn't do any of that. You know, regretted at times. But you noticed it. I thought it was lovely. And so I always had time. And she'd come to get something signed, and then she would just go home again. And so I got to know her name because I signed it so many times. But never really had a conversation. She never hung about long enough to have a conversation. And I noticed it, you know. And in one particular tour, she didn't turn up. She wasn't there. And we all noted, and everyone knew her, because she stood out. Towards the end of it, she did. She was there. I know I did a song called Time to Die. And during the song, she started crying and she ran out, you know, so that's a bit weird. But one of the crew, the lighting man, Andy, he saw her and he called out to her and said, "No, hang on a bit, you know, go and talk to him afterwards and, you know, to cheer you up." Anyway, so I met her afterwards and we had a very first ever conversation. And I said, you know, where have you, I normally see you at all the shows, where have you been? And she said that her mum was dying with cancer. And, you know, it was very sad. But we had a really long conversation for about an hour or so before she went home again. And that was that. I mean, I thought no more of it. I thought she was amazing. You know, she was a fascinating person, really, really lovely. And then I heard somehow that her mum had died. So I went on the fan club and no matter the data protection stuff, probably illegal, rummaged through it and got a phone number out of the database. I rang her up and said, you know, I've heard your mum's died. I've got to drive up to do this radio show. I'm on my own. I said, do you want to come? When I come along. She didn't think it was me to start with. She put the phone down to begin with. Thought it was somebody playing a horrible trick. Anyway, she did. She turned up. She turned up with no makeup on whatsoever because she wanted me to see the real her. Because she'd only ever been to gigs that had done that before, so there was that. And that was it. We drove up to Shropshire, I think it was, and back. And at the end of that, I was done. You know, I thought that was the one for me.
And she has changed the course of your life by the time.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah. It continues to, actually. Yeah.
And how has, you know, lockdown and all of that been for you? I mean, I guess you're in a luxurious position, but how has it affected you?
Well, I was in a pretty good position when it started. You know, things had gone well for a few years before, so I had a comfort zone, sort of financially sitting there. And when it started, I was busy making the record, and I was 3/4 into the record, so I just carried on working. And then I wrote a book. You know, our position was so much better than so many other people.
I mean, you mentioned finances. I mean, you had been in a difficult position before, hadn't you? I mean,
many times.
But you didn't lose money the sort of traditional way rock stars lose money, did you? I mean,
drugs. No.
Yeah.
No.
How did you get into a mess?
Well, initially I just poured most of it back into touring. I'd have these huge, mega shows, and then when the career started to slide, I tried to keep doing that. So I was spending money on shows that I was, you know, losing hand over fist from touring. I tried to start my own record label. That was a mistake. But I think most of it, honestly, was trying to keep up this impression that I was doing better than I was by still having the big stage shows.
Well, what did it tell you about the meaning of your initial success? You know, do you think that the stuff that was massive was better than the stuff that came after? You know, was that the high point of your creative powers?
No, I don't. I think I did some pretty rubbish stuff, actually. Early 90s, especially in 92, I did an album that was pretty bad. But it was the best I could do at the time. You know, creatively, I was nowhere. As all, you know, the career was pretty much dead and buried by 92. I mean, I was selling less records than my first punk single had sold when I was an unknown. So that's how bad it got. You know, literally couldn't give tickets away. You know, I had people in the high street trying to give them to people when they didn't want them. That's pretty demoralising. So I've been all through that.
So how did you turn it around?
Gemma came along I met Gemma in 92, started seeing each other. And we talked a lot about, you know, the state I was in, and, you know, the songwriting had really gone bad, and I wasn't writing about anything of interest. I had no passion for it. My problem had been the confidence. My lack of confidence about what I did made me feel that to make the albums better, I should bring in better musicians. So I'd bring in singers that could sing all over what I was doing. I'd put Milo in the mix. I'd bring guitar players in that were better than me, because, you know, and I thought that was the answer to it. And I stuck with that for quite some time, even though it carried on declining. Gemma said, you might not be the best singer, but you sound a certain way, and that's what people liked. So you might not be the best guitar player, you clearly not, but you play it a certain way because of that, and that's what people liked. And that was your sound, you know, your style, if you like, was based around those, your limitations, effectively. So she said, rather than trying to take them out of the music and hide them, you know, you should appreciate them for the sort of the uniquely incompetent things that they are. But, you know,
so it's back to basics, basically.
Yeah. She said you shouldn't be taking them out. You should be magnifying them, if anything, because that's what people liked about you to begin with.
So who are your fans now? I mean, is it the same people who were your fans before, or is it a new fan base?
I think I got a lot back. I'm not all by any means. I do think I've picked. I always feel a bit embarrassed saying it. You know, everyone says, "Oh, yeah, I've got new fans," but I do. You know, and I think some of it is down to the music that I've made. The music has stayed heavy and aggressive. Got more so, in fact, since '94, right up to Intruder now. I've constantly written about things that I'm concerned about, or feel really strongly about, be it climate change, or I did one about, you know, I had depression for a few years, got diagnosed with depression. I wrote one all about that. Religion, I'm not religious, but it really bothers me, so I write about it a lot. Things like that. But I think a lot of the credit, or the reason for having a newer, younger audience added to it, has been the recognition from other people, or the acknowledgement from other people. There was a tribute album called Random came out. They had about 27 or 28 bands on it doing cover versions of my stuff. You got people like Trent Reznor and Prince and Kanye West and Lady Gaga and all these sort of people have said very nice things about me. Bowie said some lovely things about me. So, you know, when you've got a lot of people of that calibre saying that I was influential, or I was a pioneer, or I was important in some way or another, that gives you a huge amount of credibility that money can't buy, that sort of credibility. But also it encourages their fans to check you out. You know, what's Trent Reznor talking about then? Who is this? Never heard of him. Oh, he wrote Cars. What else has he done? And so they look at you and they start to listen to what you're doing. And hopefully, you know, some of them will like it and will stay with you. And so you start to build up this new layer of fans that weren't there before. But it's all come from other people. So I mean, I'm really grateful for everything that was said, because again, it's made a massive difference to what I'm doing. And
is it always the dark that's inspired? I mean, have you ever written a happy song?
No.
It just doesn't...
I haven't. I really haven't. Yeah. No. I think, you know, Cars. I think Cars is probably the happiest thing I ever wrote, and that's about road rage. Yeah. I don't know why that is. I don't think I have any talent whatsoever for writing a happy tune, and it's not because I don't have experiences of it. I'm really happy. You know, I love my life. I love my kids. You know, I love my wife. I love what I do. I really love being alive. I'm a very, very happy person. But you'd never know it, would you? You'd never know it. The world's best kept secret. But I really am. It's just that I am fascinated by the other stuff.
Can I just briefly ask you, because you mentioned it again, depression. Now, you talked about depression as something you had for a period in your life and then stopped. That's not how most people talk about depression. Is it really something that just kind of came and went?
The depression itself, yes. But there's a longer story to it. I don't know if this is connected to Aspergers or not, but for my whole life, right up until I got depression, which I think was 2008, so I'd have been 50, I would have very sort of severe changes of mood, drastic, in the middle of a sentence. I could be chatting now and I'd feel it go as I'm talking to you, and it would be as if somebody just turned a tap and it just went. Horrible, horrible. And you never knew when it was coming, and it could be several times a day, always. And it was totally out of sync with the life that you're living. You know, you would have some fantastic news would come in. Oh, not always, but it could be when some fantastic news come in. Or something really terrible could happen. Fine, absolutely fine, you know. Completely out of sync with what's going on. And it's really wearing that, you know, it really sort of knocks you back often, but you get used to it. That's the way you are. You know, I spent my whole life like that until I was 50, and then it got worse. Then I started to look at old people and started crying. I started having these anxiety attacks and horrible. You know, and you know those domino things where somebody flicks one and they all just keep going. It was like that. You'd have a thought, and you'd feel it. You'd feel the next one go, oh no. And within a minute, on the floor, crying in a terrible state. Anyway, so you know, eventually, Gemma said, you know, that's getting a bit much. You need to go and talk to someone about that. I'm a bit reluctant to do, you know, mental health and all that. You know, you're very British about it. You know, just sort yourself out. But eventually, it was just getting embarrassing. You know, just happening more and more often. So even I realised that something wasn't right. So I went to see a doctor about what I thought were panic attacks or anxiety attacks. And he said the underlying cause of any sort of anxiety is depression. So they put me on a pill which didn't work at all, made me permanently miserable. Leveled me out, none of that anymore, but in a really bad place, you know. So I said, well, that's no good. So they put me on another one, and that was much better. That leveled me out, but it made me not really care about anything. I'd never been sort of happy-go-lucky before, you know, always very thoughtful, you know, about what's coming and so on. Anyway, that was great, and it really helped and it really worked. And the problem I found with the cure for depression was that it's very seductive to someone that had my history. If you have a history of being up and down, to find yourself level was amazing. You know, not happy, not super happy, but just level. You know, not having to feel that dropping off of mood, you know. And I didn't want to come out of it. I'd have quite happily stayed on those pills forever. In fact, I lied to the doctor to get my dose up.
Did it affect your creativity?
Yeah, totally destroyed it. That was the problem. I didn't care. I was just happy drifting along. And they did an intervention on me. He said, you've not written a song for 2 years. You know, you've got this new momentum with the career and you're just killing it. You know, you've got to do something. I think when they finished the whole intervention, they said to me, how do you feel about that? And I said, oh, I'm ever so sorry, I wasn't listening. I was thinking about kittens, which was true. I wasn't even listening. I wanted a grey kitten, I think, at the time. Didn't give a monkeys, you know. And what stopped it, eventually, it was Gemma again. Gemma said that she didn't fancy me anymore because I'd lost all my ambition. And she said, you're not the person I married. That was it. That did it. A little bit of vanity. Yeah, hit me in my vanity and I'll listen to what you're saying. But it did. That's what did it. And so I started to wean myself off them over a period of time. Really frightened of those moods coming back. And they did. So that was a bit of a panicky moment when I first started to feel the bubbling again. But they've been in sync. When they come back, they came back for a reason. You know, I was down when I should have been down. And so now I'm nowhere near as up and down as I used to be, but it's still there, but it's all in sync, you know. So it doesn't wear you out mentally the way it did before. So I feel I'm in a much better place than I was before because of it. So I'm in a way, I'm sort of grateful that it happened.
And so you're back on tour now?
We're doing a streamed show now, which is kind of an awkward halfway house, really. The touring proper will hopefully start in September in the US, if things with COVID keep going well. The next British tour is April next year. And for me, that is a huge thing. I retired from, I said I was going to retire from playing live in 1981 when I did some shows at Wembley. And it was genuine. I mean, I was massively overwhelmed and I felt like I was going to be ruined. Not financially, but as a person, because of all that success and all the madness that comes with it and the chaos that goes on. And I didn't want to be. I wanted to stay a decent person and I wanted to keep my feet on the ground and not feel special or any of that. And I blamed touring for it. I thought that put me in the limelight. So I made this decision to pull out of it and just take a breath and just try to grasp what had happened in a calmer environment. And the mistake I made was announcing that. I should have just done it, you know, and I didn't have to make a big thing about it. Upset everybody, fans, promoters, record company, just upset everybody, and I just ruined everything. And I spent the next 40 years trying to get back to where I was then. And for me, Wembley has become a symbol of that desire to get back. So not album position. Now the last album did really, really well. And it was amazing, but it wasn't enough. For me, Wembley has been this symbol of recovery. And so when we do that tour next year, and we are going back to Wembley, that will be probably the best day of my life.
Will that be the first time you've been back there?
Yeah, since 1981, yeah.
That's going to be a big moment. Yeah.
Long time, eh? Yeah. Took me longer than I expected.
Well, thank you very much indeed for talking to us. We have an end question on this podcast, which is, if you could change the world in any way, how would you change it?
I'd make paedophiles have death penalty.
Wow. That's come out of left field. I feel I've got to explore that a bit.
Okay.
So where's that come from?
Deep, deep hatred of paedophiles, yeah. Deep. Before I had kids. Worse since I've had kids, but.
But not because you know anyone involved or anything like that. There's not. I mean.
I do actually. You do? Yes. I was good friends with someone many years ago when I used to fly. Not a pilot, when I used to fly. Who long after I sort of moved away and sort of didn't know him so well anymore, was arrested for being a paedophile. But that's not why. That's not why. I just think it is the most horrendous thing that anyone can do at all. And for those people that do it to their own children, you know, I'd fucking kill them all. I would. Anyone. I'd turn anyone in, split on anyone. It's the only thing that truly upsets me to such a degree I can't watch it. I get upset.
Yeah. And you've obviously got a lot of fury about having known somebody.
It's the invisibility of it. Right there in front of you, sitting in my plane. You know, not knowing, never seeing it. You know, that the way it's invisible, you know, it's the treachery of that. Anyway, sorry, that's a bit heavy, wasn't it? I didn't.
No, well,
I should have come up with something like.
To work out what it
should have come up with something.
That came out as a surprise. So I thought I'd better just pursue it. Well, it's been really interesting, Gary. Thank you very much indeed, and thanks for being so open and for joining us on Ways to Change the World. Hope you enjoyed that. If you did, then please do give us a rating and a review so other people can find this podcast. Our producer is Rachel Evans. Until next time, bye-bye.